Hi, I'm Mick Brandenberger. Today we're going to be examining the role of space and time in the creation of artworks in painting of scenes. To do this, we're going to go through three phases in this video. The first phase deals with why would we want to consider such a thing? Why space and time in the act of creating scenes and painting? The second phase will be looking at sort of the historical context in which this space and time has evolved through time until present and the effect it has had on my personal work of art. And of course, the third phase will be showing you these influences on my work now. Let's take a look first at the first section called Why. Why would we want to examine space and time in the act of creating a work of art? Well, the main idea here is that the artwork is expressing the work of its creator. That is, our humanity, whether it has to do with our predilections about what colors we use or techniques or themes or you name it, whatever it is that's inside of us, that comes out in our artwork. Therefore, what is inside of our own humanity gives us a clue to the meaning of the work we have just created. So that is why we want to look at the notion of space and time in painting, because space and time has something to do with our own humanity. There are two thinkers that I'm going to refer to that make this point. Both of them are well renowned in the world of philosophy. I am not a philosopher. When I read their work, it was very dense for me to get it, so I had to read commentaries on those particular works for it in order to make sense for me. The first one I'm going to mention is Immanuel Kant. Immanuel Kant was in the time of age of enlightenment or reason. That was around 1781. He created his work, and it's a famous work called A Critique of Pure Reason. Now in that work, he had a section called Transcendental Aesthetic. I didn't read the whole work of Critique of Pure Reason, but when I saw that word aesthetic, being an artist, having aesthetics, being a part of art, it caught my attention, so I thought I might want to pay attention. In that section of Transcendental Aesthetic, he introduces a term called a priori. Prior. What comes first before we can become a human being? Whoa, how can anybody attack that question? Well, he basically says, and forgive me for using an everyday common vernacular, but he commonly says that for us to be a human being, we have to be able to live in, to be sensitive to understand, to be able to manipulate time and space. Let me give you a quick, easy example. If I walk up to you and say, "Hi, I'm Mick Brandenberger," and of course you do likewise, you respond, you give me your name, and we have a meeting. That very humane interaction right there requires that we live in space and time. For example, if I give you my name, Mick, I know who my parents are. I know my family members. I know my experiences growing up. I have a feeling about what it is I prefer in life, my predilections, my leanings, and all of those things become very important to me. That has to do with living through time. Also, if I'm introducing myself to you, I know that I exist over here and you exist over there. Well, let's give even a greater existence. An example. If you introduce yourself and you say, "Oh, you did that painting over there? Oh, I really like that." Again, another instance of being aware of space and time, living in space and time, because, oh, that's on a wall over there in that environment. And it's within the space of the frame. And that I understand through time my experiences of art and all that it means to me and to you. So again, that just gives you an inclination of what it means to be able to live in space and time. So when we live in space and time, has a direct connection to how we create the work of art, the meaning of the work of art, and so on. So I'm going to also bring a more contemporary thinker, because that was way back in the age of enlightenment, or the age of reason, and bring it into the 20th century. And that thinker is Martin Heidegger. He had a huge influence on, say, existentialism and phenomenology, etc. His claim is that we are born in a particular time and space. That is, we live in a space, in a location. We're born here. We didn't have that choice. We live it. That is the culture we live in. It's the language we use. It's the experiences we get. It's the mores we live by. It's the values we have. All of that becomes us. So in a way, he's also getting at this through his seminal work called Being and Time, and that was created in the 20th century. So basically what we're saying here is that looking at space and time in a work of art has to do with looking at how we live space and time, and is therefore meaningful in that respect. So now we're going to look at the history of painting at the end of the medieval times, making its transition into the modern world. History is usually divided into 4 phases. One is prehistoric, ancient, medieval, and modern. And we may be getting out of the modern age, but we don't know that for sure. So let's take a look at the last 2, transition from medieval to modern. We're going to look at 2 artists in that transition from the medieval to what we call the modern art world. Those 2 artists are Cimabue and Giotto. Cimabue was the teacher of Giotto. Cimabue remained pretty much, but was starting to edge towards modern world, but really was a Byzantine artist. So I want to start with the work of Cimabue and how he relates to space and time. In the Middle Ages, religion was key to our existence. I mean, think about all of the magnificent cathedrals that were built. Think of going on the Crusades. Think of, all of that permeated the culture of the Middle Ages. So in the Christian world, God is everywhere. He sees everything. He is omnipresent. So when you take a look at the work of Cimabue, you will see that he actually takes a lot of this attitude, so that there is no one particular point of view, but rather there's multiple points of view so he can see clearly everything. Let me give you an example of what that means. Let's say, for example, I create some kind of sin and I want to hide, Can't hide from God. He can see around the corner. He sees every face in a crowd. So let's take a look at that work by Cimabue. Here we see all the faces clearly. And as we back out, we see that they are almost stacked high on each other because the view has to be clear for each face. In a sense, that shows an omnipresent point of view. That is a particular appreciation for and understanding and a living in a world in which space and time have this omnipresent factor. Giotto, his student, decided he would do something different. He decided he wanted to see what it would be like and depict a scene as if he was there witnessing some religious event. So his point of view now in terms of space and time is one moment in one place. Not multiple points of view floating throughout the universe. Nope. He sits there. That is his existence. He's very humane in the sense he wants to see what it's like as a human to view a religious incident. So let's take a look at Giotto's work. Giotto's work was Orgasante Madonna, done in 1310. Virgin and Child Enthroned was the one by Cimabue. That was done in 1281. So if you take a look at Giotto's work, you can see now that it's beginning of what we would call linear perspective. It's not that sophisticated yet, but it is radically different from what preceded it. And here you can see that it's basically one point of view, so that, oh yes, there's somebody in front of another person, in front of another person, in front of another person, as if you have a partial view, or the person in the back is being partially blocked in the view by the people in the front, which means that there's only one point of view at one instant. Now that's the transition from Byzantine art into early Renaissance. In fact, the Renaissance hasn't started yet, but it was the work of Giotto and others like Duccio who began this attitude And what I'd like to do now is show you a work by Giovanni Bellini. And it is the San Gobi altarpiece done in 1487. It shows a more refined point of linear perspective in the sense that now being in one position at one instant and depicting a scene has been highly sophisticated, most notably by the architect Brunelleschi. He codified that system into a smooth recession of space according to the size of things and how far or near they are to you. That is traditionally known as linear perspective. It is based on guidelines that are straight. It was so influential that it was dominated Western art for 400 to 500 years, depending on how you're going to slice and dice it. In fact, it's still with us now. So now we're going to fast forward from the work of Giotto, Bellini, and many of the Renaissance artists, going through all of the artists who I have loved, for example, Rembrandt, Rubens, and on and on and on. I mean, I just flabbergasted by their work. So now we're going to go to the more modern age. That begins with the Impressionists around the 1860s. So we look at the work of Manet, for example, and the rest of the Impressionists. We're going to fast forward slightly to an artist, Paul Cézanne. Now, Paul Cézanne created a work called The Kitchen Table in 1886. The Kitchen Table in 1886. This shows a departure from what had been established for all that 400 to 500 and continuing now years of how we view space and time in the act of creating a scene. First, let's take a look at the table. Notice that the table now is broken up into two planes. And also notice in the basket on the top that you have 2 points of view also going on. One is almost a straight on point of view, and another one is a point of view that's higher up. So you have multiple points of view and shifting of planes. Radical departure from what had happened throughout the Renaissance up until that time. The importance of Paul Cézanne had to do with what followed after him as well. There was a young artist who saw his work and claimed, "Paul Cézanne is my one and only master." Yeah, it's quite a statement. That young artist was Pablo Picasso. So I want to show you a work of Pablo Picasso and to show you what he had absorbed from Paul Cézanne, how he transformed that into what we call cubism. He worked through analytic to synthetic cubism, and the reason that's so important is that he's often credited as opening the floodgates to modern art. We're not going to be able to cover all of modern art because much of it is formalistic and related to sort of an abstract side of art, which is not actually depicting a scene. It is just as valid as anything. It's just that that's not part of the focus of this video. So when we see in the work of Pablo Picasso, the shifting of viewpoints in the face. You can see a profile and a front view all at the same time. You can see that the planes have been broken up now into shapes and that they kind of they have an interaction. So that's what Pablo Picasso had done. Now also Giorgio di Chirico, a surrealist, did a work called Mystery and Melancholy on a Street. And here we don't have so much a shifting of planes, but we do have multiple points of view. You can take a look at the building on the left, how it kind of goes one way. You can take a look at the building on the right, and it kind of goes down, and the shadowing, and all of that suggests some kind of strange, surrealistic world. So that shows another example of space and time in what we call modern art. So let's now fast forward to our times. There is an artist who gives a very clear example of how he has combined all of these influences into his particular approach to representing scenes. He is a perceptualist. That is, he takes his easel, he plants it, he sits there and he works and he sees what's in front of him. But he does something a little different than what we normally think of when we think of, say, plein air painters or impressionists. He extends his peripheral vision. For example, if I'm standing here, my peripheral vision would be here. If I want to look left, I can see what's here for a moment, but I must not see it as soon as I look left. I can't see it anymore. I'm looking to the left. So that requires an extension of time. Same thing if I go right. Same thing if I look up, if I look down. He develops a way of using consistent recession of space, the old traditional way that was established way back in the Renaissance, by using a perceptive. What he does now is he extends that vision into one consistent image by using curvilinear perspective. That is, he bends space because as he experiences looking up and looking this way and looking up and looking that way and so forth, the space tends to bend. I've done a video on this before. You can look it up in YouTube. It's just a little more extensive in showing you how curvilinear perspective actually works. Okay. Now we get to the point where we've seen why I think considering space and time is very important in understanding how you create images in a work of art when it depicts a scene. How do I use it? How have all these influences from the past all the way to now have influenced me? So now let's take a look at one of my paintings. I know this is kind of ironic because this is titled The View. When we look at this painting, hopefully you're drawn into it as if you're actually in it. Let's say like Rackstraw Downs was actually in this environment looking all around. And we're doing the same kind of thing. A little differently than Rackstraw, but still the same kind of basic idea of space and time. So if you look in this direction here, it does look like it's kind of a straight linear perspective type thing we could see way back in the Renaissance. Or same thing over here. Or how about here? You could look in that and it kind of fades way over here, or look at the sun over here. But notice, at that same time, not only can you look left and right, but you can look down on those stones as if you were standing on it or floating above it. And you can take those stones and you can look down the steps and follow it all the way back into the horizon. You can look up under the rafter and you can look up and down and left and right. What I'm hoping to do with this approach to making a scene is create and develop a sense of visionary art based on the space and time attributes of curvilinear perspective. That's what I'm working on. If you want to see other examples, you can go to my webpage. That is www.brandenbergerfineart.com. If you have any questions, you can, of course, thanks for paying attention. Thanks for viewing this. Have a good day. Bye.